Thank you so much, Yulene Olaizola, for being with us. This is the Q&A of Selva Trágica, a new film by one of the most prominent Mexican filmmakers nowadays. And not only the most important woman filmmaker, the most prominent filmmaker everywhere in Mexico. And it's the third time that we have a film by Yulene. We had in the past Artificial Paradise. We also have Epitaph, which was co-directed by Rubén Imaz and Yulene herself. And this is a film which in certain ways confirms that you are a very brave filmmaker, because you always put yourself in situations that are not easy to establish as a filmmaker. To be in the jungle is not easy to shoot. And first of all, I'd like to know, before talking about the story, the mythical context and the historical context, I liked, because we are in Germany. In fact, I am in Argentina now and you are in Mexico. But in Germany, I guess that for most of the people there, more cinephiles, they, in certain ways, they relate the jungle with Mr. Herzog. So I was wondering, when you were doing the film, if Fitzcarraldo or some other Herzog films, because it's not the only one that takes place in a jungle, were in certain ways a kind of inspiration. And then I would like to know about the shooting itself, because there is dangerous moment. There are many shots with animals, and it seems to be there is no fake. It is it's true images. There is no digital anything. It's the real anima in front of the camera. So I like to start from that point.
Okay. Yeah, I think Werner Herzog is always a reference in my work. Not only Fitzcarraldo. I would start by mentioning Aguirre, The Wrath of God. And all of his films, or his working method, it's something that I've always think of. And actually nowadays that I teach in the film school, I used to give all the information I can about Herzog himself and his teaching lessons, his masterclass online, etc. I think he's one of my favorite filmmakers, and I admire his approach to filmmaking as just as a regular profession, like being a cooker, being a carpenter, whatever. It's just another profession. And he relates to cinema in that way. Of course, as you mentioned, shooting in the jungle is not easy, but also if you have the right production conditions, it can be a normal shooting. It doesn't have to be this crazy adventure that people would think. Mm-hmm. For example, when you think about movies like Apocalypse Now, or even Aguirre itself, nowadays we have the means to prepare for everything and to have a very controlled shooting. So in my case, it wasn't that difficult to be inside the jungle, and especially I was surrounded with the main people in my crew. For example, the main actress Indira Andrewin, who is a non-professional actress from Belize. She basically lives in the jungle, because Belize is basically a jungle. Even the biggest cities like Belize City is surrounded by jungle. So at least for her, it was a natural environment. Also, Sofia Oggioni, the DOP, she's been used to shoot in the jungle before, and she's a woman who's always in contact with nature. So the main three positions in the film, led by the three of us, we were all confident about shooting in the jungle. And most of the actors are non-professional actors who actually live and work in the jungle. So most of the people were confident enough to be there. But besides that, of course, you have to be careful about snakes, for example. That would be the most dangerous thing, of course. But we took all the measures, the security measures we needed to do. And besides that, I think there are more difficult things in cinema to handle, like working with people, like working with non-professional actors, working in two different languages, English and Spanish. Those are bigger challenges for me than being shooting inside of the jungle itself. I cannot reveal the whole secret about how we shot those animals,
Okay.
but Tragic Jungle is not a big production film, so we didn't have the money to go for the digital option. And besides that, I do work with visual effects, and we have visual effects in the film, but I like to try to have the most real approach to the things that I shoot. So in the case of the animals, we decided that everything was going to be real, and we didn't use any visual effects. For example, the shots that you mentioned with the jaguar were not shot in the night, where they were shot during the day, and it's like a day for night color grading effect.
I imagine a little bit that, but anyway, it's so beautiful, that moment. It's such a, it reminds me a little bit, Apichatpong versus a cool mystery on the jungle, you know, like it's another reference that I can imagine that.
I cannot deny that reference.
Okay. Let's go on with something that for me is very interesting about your cinema, which is absolutely connected with this. Till now, except the opera prima that you have done, the rest of your films are always outside. So what do you think it's that kind of tendency that you have to go to open spaces, which are not easy to shoot, which are landscape, and landscape are treated as a kind of protagonist?
I think one of the things that I enjoy the most about making films is to have the opportunity to experience a different adventure that otherwise in my daily life I wouldn't experience. So for me, it's always more exciting to go outside, to go to remote locations, isolated places, and to put myself in these harsh conditions and experience these adventures of being there and shooting there. So basically, all of my films have started with that: a location, a place, and then I do research in that place, and I find stories, people, and the idea grows in my head.
Tell me something about the how do you decide to work on sound, because the sound in the film, it's extremely ostensible. It's you realize there is the jungle is not only an entity which you could relate it to in terms of visuals, but also in terms of sound, and it's not just a sound design. There is something more. It's like it says a lot. And it's, of course, it goes beyond the voiceover, which is sometimes used.
One of the things that I knew from the very beginning, after living and traveling around this area, is that once you are in the jungle, you know that you are surrounded by different animals, insects, and creatures, but you cannot see them. You only hear them. So when I was doing like all the research process, I lived there for 4 months in a house inside the jungle, in a very isolated place, without internet, without telephone signal, and I started to relate to those sounds. And you are always listening to things, but you cannot see them because everything is so vast with nature, and you cannot see the different animals around you. So what I decided from the very beginning is to try to recreate that in the sound design. And it's really weird because once you're inside the shooting in the jungle, the direct sound, the direct recordings are really, really silent. if you hear the sound recording of the film, you don't hear most of the animals that then we had to add in layers and layers of sound design. It's amazing, but I think once the humans are noticed by the animals and the insects, everybody just goes away, and it's a total silence inside the jungle. So we had to work a lot in adding layers of sound to create the experience that I have lived inside the jungle, about listening to different animals and stuff that you cannot see, but you can hear.
The last question is, how do you perceive in the new Mexican cinema nowadays? Do you see yourself, do you feel connected with any tradition in Mexican cinema, or do you feel a kind of singularity among others?
It's a difficult question, because I think Mexican cinema is really big, especially in the last 10, 15 years. Mm-hmm. We've been producing a lot of films. So we're talking about more than 100 films per year. I used to consider to be one of the young filmmakers, but I'm not young anymore.
You look like that.
10 more generations behind me, or 15 generations of filmmakers behind me. So I'm not really sure. I just find I do find the similarities with many filmmakers who are friends of mine, and that we work in a similar way, which is just to create our own stories, our own production methods, and try to find finance by the Mexican Film Institute and film festivals all over the world to finance our films, and to be able to be free to choose whatever we want to do as filmmakers, and not to be tied to big production companies or big producers who have to make the most important decisions. So I just consider myself to be an independent filmmaker, as many others in Mexico, that we work in a similar way.
Well, it has been such a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you so much for your time. I know that you are about to have your world premiere in Venice in the next 3-4 days. You had the generosity to give us a little bit of your time. And on behalf of all the people from Filmfest Hamburg, let me say once again, thank you so much. Muchas gracias. And danke. Okay, thank you.
Gracias.
And ciao, ciao.
Ciao, gracias.